to whom are we so connected that it demands that we act differently. We need to understand to whom we are bound and why. It is the work of a lifetime, the work of an entire ministry to unveil all of those bonds. And so I won't keep you here for a lifetime. Instead, I'll just highlight two of those bonds that I think are essential to the work that we are doing together today. The fact that we are bound together as Unitarian Universalist congregations to one another in a movement, and the fact that we are bound to a bruised and broken world. We are bound to one another. In 1648, our spiritual ancestors set forth a document that still governs how our congregations act with one another today. The Cambridge Platform, as it became known, defines 7 ways of being in covenant with one another as congregations, cleverly hidden in a list of 6. And then 7 ways of being together. They are mutual care for one another, consultation with one another. When your congregation needs to know how to do something, the first groups that you should go to are the congregations with whom you are in relationship. Admonition of one another. There are times in which we have to tell one another that we're doing things wrong. It's hard to do that, but we are covenanted together in an association of congregations to do that as well. Participation and recommendation, which means that members in one congregation can freely go to another congregation and be accepted as Unitarian Universalists in good standing. Relief and succor. The Cambridge Platform writers understood that there were times in which we needed to help our fellow congregations going through hard times, times in which we needed to help our fellow congregations reach up to their visions and their goals. And propagation is the 7th one, not put in the list of 6, but still in there. Our obligation in covenant with one another to help new congregations form, to spread this movement beyond the walls of the congregations we already have. In responding to an email I got from the Board of Trustees asking me about essential questions about my upcoming service as your trustee on our UUA board, I was asked, what are some of the greatest challenges facing our congregations? And here's part of what I wrote. I won't read you the whole email either. That would also take a lifetime. I said, I see the biggest issue facing the association as a whole, the commitment of congregations to be in covenant with one another. This includes their commitment to fair share giving, as well as their commitment to relationship with other congregations. Like many of our members, our congregations look at our association from a what do I get perspective. These questions come up with respect to governance. Do we get our services from districts or regions or some other body yet to be named or defined? They come up when we talk about money, when we're asked to pay fair share dues to our association and district, and our congregations look at our budgets and go, oh, maybe we can cut that and just give them what's left over after our other priorities are met. When we are asked to engage in the work of chalice letters, helping other congregations start new programs, fix their buildings, or reach out to their communities. These questions come up with respect to justice work all the time. When we are asked how we can effectively partner with one another to be a liberal religious voice for morality, justice, and equality in our world. We have largely lost sight of these bonds. We've largely lost sight of them partially in our exuberance to debate bylaws, ends, and governance structures ad nauseum. How many board members should we have? Policy governance or not? N number 1, 1A, 1B, 2A, 3C, which one are we talking about? We debate them ad nauseum in our gatherings all over, near and far, large and small. And I'm here to tell you that salvation by governance, however much we will not occur. It has never occurred, it's not occurring now, and it will not come to us. Salvation, such as it is, such as we find it, such as we proclaim it as Unitarian Universalists, comes only from relationships. We are not bound together by a set of bylaws. We are not bound together by a set of ends meticulously and lovingly crafted by board members working very hard and diligently on your behalf. We are bound by covenant, and it is a covenant that calls us to action. We do well to remember that in our work together today. We are also bound to our world, such as it is a world that is battered and broken and hurting. A few years ago, our congregation brought a group of youth and adults to New Orleans for a week to live at the First Unitarian Universalist Church of New Orleans in their volunteer center, 18 of us in one tiny room for an entire week. It was a transformative experience. And there, one of the messages that was driven home again and again was that the people of New Orleans asked us to come there not just to help them rebuild, but to understand the difference between charity and solidarity. It was a message that was driven home again and again in all of the work that we did in the anti-racism training that preceded the work, in the volunteer work that we did, in the reflections that we did in the evenings, in our own discussions on the plane and afterwards. We were asked to understand the difference between charity, doing something for someone else, and solidarity, standing with them, partnering with them in their struggle, being inextricably bound to another who is going through tough times. And there are some moments from that week where that difference was starkly obvious. I remember on our first full day in New Orleans, we took a self-guided tour of the city. And at one point, we, as a group of 18, stood on a block in the lower 9th Ward of New Orleans, once a thriving neighborhood of small but proud houses, a thriving neighborhood of people whose families had lived there for generations. And as we stood there, some 5 years after Hurricane Katrina, the neighborhood was almost nothing but concrete paths where houses once stood and weeds that had grown up around those concrete paths. And we stood there and imagined the houses that stood on those paths. We stood there and imagined the people that once walked and played and laughed and danced and made music and argued in those streets. And one of the youth in our fellowship turned to us and said, "I can't believe that this is the same country that I live in." She felt in that moment her bonds to the people of that neighborhood, to the people of New Orleans. In that moment, she understood what it meant to be in solidarity with the people of New Orleans. Katie Hardiman wrote a poem when she returned based on her experience meeting a little boy named Cece. This little boy had lost everything. Before the storm, he had lost his family. His mother and his father had both been killed. He lived with his grandmother, and during the storm and its aftermath, they lost their home, they lost their possessions. And Cece danced. He danced with wild abandon and joy. And he asked only that people in his midst spend a little bit of time dancing with him. being with him, feeling their joy. He didn't ask them for money or food or nails to rebuild his house. He asked them only to spend a little bit of time dancing with him, because what he needed most in the world was a little bit of joy in this bleak landscape. Katie, in her poem, as you know, understood what it meant to be in solidarity with that young boy on that day. Anti-oppression work, the work of anti-racism, anti-sexism, anti-heterosexism, anti-classism, the list goes on. Anti-oppression work is also a way that we uncover the bonds that bind each to all. The work of standing on the side of love means doing that work. It means understanding in all that we do that we are bound to those who are broken by this world, damaged by hatred and intolerance, marginalized and oppressed. We are inextricably bound to all of those who need a place to heal from their wounds, their spiritual, physical, and emotional wounds that they need to heal from. We are bound to them. They are part of us. They are we. We are they. We are bound together. At our fellowship, we have a ritual that many of you, I know, share in our Sunday morning worship. We light candles of joys and sorrows for the milestones in our lives. It's a ritual that I have come to love as a minister. I might stand in the minority of my colleagues on that, but I have come to love it because it is a way in which we unveil the bonds that bind each to all on Sunday morning. It is a way in which we understand that our lives do not end at the doorway to our sanctuary. We bring our lives in there with each other, and we unveil those bonds and are called to action based on the things that we hear. We are called to celebrate with one another. We are called to console one another. We are called to help one another heal and be whole as a result of the things we hear. I have taken in recent days and weeks to adding something to that practice of joys and concern, joys and sorrows. Our final candle is always lit for those joys and sorrows that remain silent. I have taken recently to adding to that final candle the joys and sorrows of those who are out there and have not yet found a community in which to express their joys and sorrows. I do this on purpose. I do this because this ritual that unveils the bonds that bind us together as a fellowship community also unveils the bonds that bind us to the people in our community